The night they put her out, the rain over Mount Hollow came down so hard it sounded like someone beating a tin roof with a closed fist. Eleanor Hartwell stood on the front step of a house that had never been hers, 68 years old, holding a small canvas suitcase while her son looked at the porch boards instead of her face. And her daughter-in-law folded her arms across her chest, the way you fold a letter you have already decided not to send. "You'll be all right, Mother. We talked about this." That was the moment Eleanor understood she did not have a home anymore. 3 nights later, soaked through and shaking, she walked into a small bank on a corner she had not seen in 12 years, carrying nothing but her late husband's worn blue card. The young manager looked at his screen. Then he looked again. Then he stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. "Mrs. Hartwell, ma'am, do you have any idea this account holds over $4 million?" And everything she thought she knew about the last 46 years of her life turned very quietly upside down. Before we go any further into Eleanor's story, and I promise you, friend, this one stays with you, please take just a moment to subscribe and tap that like button. If stories about quiet women who finally find their voice mean something to you, this channel was made for you. And tell me down in the comments where you're watching from tonight and what time it is in your part of the world. I read everyone. Your voice matters here more than you might think. My name is Eleanor Hartwell, and until the autumn I turned 68, I believed I understood the shape of my own life. I was a wife for 46 years, a mother for 42, a school teacher for 31. I taught the 2nd grade at Mount Hollow Elementary, in a brick building under a row of black walnut trees, and I came home each afternoon to a white clapboard house at the end of Beechwood Lane, where a great oak older than the county courthouse stood watch over the front gate. My husband Thomas built that gate himself back when Walter was still small enough to ride on his shoulders. Thomas Hartwell was not a flashy man. He ran a small construction outfit out of a tin roof shop behind the house. 4 employees, a flatbed truck, and the reputation in 3 counties for never leaving a job half finished. He paid his bills on the 1st of every month. He kept his word the way other men keep their wallets. And every Sunday evening without fail, he sat on the porch swing beside me with a cup of black coffee and watched the light change over the Blue Ridge. That was our life, small, steady, ours. The cancer came for him the way the fog comes for the mountains in October. Slow at first, then everywhere at once. Pancreatic, the doctor in Roanoke said in a voice too gentle for the words. Thomas heard it the way he heard everything else hard in his life, with a single nod and a long breath through his nose. He did not cry. Not then. He drove us home through the gap, one hand on the wheel, and the other folded around mine. And when we passed the old Whitfield place, he said, "Well, Ellie, I reckon we got some figuring to do." He did the figuring without telling me most of it. That was Thomas. He carried the heaviest things on the side of him you couldn't see. In the last week, when he could no longer rise from the bed by the window, he asked me to bring him his Sunday coffee anyway. I propped him up against the pillows, and we watched the light move across the oak in the yard the way we had watched it move for 46 October evenings before. He took my hand. His fingers were so thin I could feel the bones of them like reeds. "Ellie, there's something I need you to remember." I leaned closer. The medicine made his voice no bigger than the sound of a page being turned in a quiet room. "Trust the blue card when the time comes. Not people, honey, not even kin. The blue card." I did not understand. I told myself it was the morphine talking the way pain bends a man's words. I squeezed his hand and told him yes, of course I would remember. I would have promised him the stars off the ridge that night. He gave me a smile, then the tired, knowing smile he had given me at the altar in 1979, and closed his eyes. He passed 2 evenings later, just after the porch light came on. After the funeral, the house at the end of Beechwood Lane held a silence so thick I could feel it pressing against my ears. Every creak of the pine floor sounded like a question I could not answer. The oak outside the kitchen window stood the way it had always stood, indifferent and patient. And I sat at the table some mornings and stared at it until my coffee went cold. My son Walter began driving up from Roanoke on weekends. He brought groceries I did not need and fixed faucets that were not broken. His wife Cordelia, Cora, she insisted on being called, now came with him, sometimes smiling the kind of smile that arrives at the corners of the mouth but never reaches the eyes. She wore tailored coats even in the kitchen. She kept her hands clean. Mother, you cannot stay out here by yourself. It isn't safe. The stairs alone. I had been climbing those stairs for 34 years. I had carried a son up them with a broken arm and a Christmas tree down them every January. But grief is a heavy coat, and after a while you stop fighting the people who want to take it off you, even when you suspect they only want the pockets. So I sold the house. I will not lie to you, friend. I did not sleep the night before the papers were signed. I walked from room to room with my hand trailing along the walls, saying goodbye to things I had no language for. The pencil marks on the doorframe where Walter's height had climbed inch by inch. The patch of linoleum worn through by Thomas's boot in front of the sink. The window where every spring for 46 springs the light had come in over the oak at exactly the same slant just after Easter. I took two boxes out of 46 years. Walter and Cora's house sat in a new subdivision on the far side of Roanoke, all beige siding and lawns that looked combed. My guest room had a wallpaper border of pale blue flowers and a small vase of cut hydrangeas on the nightstand. Cora had arranged everything herself. We want you to feel at home, Mother. I believed her for about 3 weeks. The changes came in the way water finds its way into a basement patient. Quiet you do not notice until something is already ruined. It started with the mail. Oh, I'll just sort that for you, Mother. You shouldn't have to fuss with all those notices. Then the checkbook. Walter and I were thinking, since the pension and the Social Security come in on different days, it might be simpler if we just keep them in one place for now. Then the phone. The landline began to be answered before it had finished its first ring, always by Cora, always with her back to the room. I noticed and did not notice. That is the cruel arithmetic of being lonely in someone else's house. You barter pieces of yourself for the feeling of being needed, and you do not count the pieces until they are gone. Then came the morning of the downstairs room. Cora stood in the doorway of my upstairs bedroom, with her arms folded the way she would later fold them on the porch. Mother, we've been talking. The stairs are really getting to be a worry. We've cleaned out the den downstairs for you. It'll be so much easier. I looked past her at Walter in the hallway. He was studying the carpet as though he had never seen it before. I have been using stairs my whole life, Cora. Yes, Mother, and you've done a great many things your whole life. But things change. I moved downstairs the next day. The den was small and faced the back fence. The window did not catch the morning sun. There was no oak. There was no anything really except a daybed and a small desk and a closet that smelled faintly of someone else's winter coats. At night, lying there in the dark, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator through two walls, and I would think of the porch swing on Beechwood Lane and the way Thomas's coffee cup used to click against the saucer when he set it down beside mine. I would think of him saying, "Trust the blue card," and I would wonder for the first time what on earth he had meant. I went looking for it without admitting to myself that was what I was doing. I told myself I was reorganizing, just sorting through the boxes I had brought. I worked in the afternoons when Cora was at her Pilates class and Walter was at the office, and I went through them slowly, lifting out each thing the way a person lifts out the bones of a small bird. Thomas's reading glasses, the wooden rosary his mother had given him at his confirmation, a Christmas card I had made for him in 1981 with a pressed sprig of cedar inside. I did not find it that week. I did not find it the next. What I found instead was the thing that broke the surface of the water. It was a Tuesday around 8:30 at night, and I had gone into the kitchen for a glass of milk because sleep would not come. The hallway light was off. The dishwasher was running. Cora's voice was in the dining room low, the way a voice is when the person speaking believes no one is listening. No, No, she doesn't understand any of it. That's the whole point. She signs where we tell her to sign. She trusts him. That's the advantage we have. That's what we've been waiting for. A pause. The clink of a wine glass against a counter. Look, the attorney said once the financial authority transfers the guardianship paperwork moves a lot faster. We just need her steady, compliant. A few more weeks and then, it doesn't matter what she remembers. I stood in the dark hallway with my hand pressed flat against the wall. I do not remember breathing. I remember the cool of the plaster against my palm and the way the dishwasher kept on humming as though the world were the same world it had been 30 seconds before. She trusts him. That's the advantage. I went back to bed without the milk. I lay in the dark of that small den and stared at the ceiling for what must have been hours, and somewhere around 2 in the morning, I understood with a clarity that felt almost holy that the trouble in this house was not in my head. It had a shape and a voice, and it had been speaking very softly for some time. The next morning, I came to the breakfast table, and Cora poured my coffee and said, "Did you sleep well, Mother?" In the same warm voice as always, and I said, "Like a stone dear," and smiled at her over the rim of the cup. Something inside me had moved very quietly into a different room. I started watching. I noticed how Cora's eyes flicked to the mail slot every afternoon at 3. I noticed how Walter avoided me in any room that contained his wife. I noticed that when I asked about a Medicare statement I knew should have arrived, Cora's hand made a small dismissive arc in the air. "Oh, we switched all of that to paperless, Mother. Saves trees." I noticed she never quite met my eyes when she said it. And 4 days after the call in the dining room, I found the card. I was folding a winter sweater I had not worn since Thomas's last Christmas, and my fingers caught on something stiff in the lining of the side pocket. A small slit had been opened in the silk and closed with 2 careful stitches. I cut the stitches with the kitchen scissors. Out slid a card the deep weathered color of a sky just before dusk. No bank name, no logo. A faint metallic strip and a soft worn edge where Thomas's thumb must have rested 1,000 times. I sat down on the daybed and held it in both hands, and I'm not too proud to tell you, friend, that I wept. Not for the card. For the man who had hidden it where only love would find it. For the patience of him. For the long quiet planning of a husband already dying, who had thought of me on a day he knew he would not be there. Trust the blue card, not people. I understood now that he had not been talking about strangers. I did not use it, not that night, not the next. I tucked it under my pillow and lay awake with my hand resting on the small hard square of it through the pillowcase, the way a child sleeps with a hand on a stuffed bear. I needed to be sure. I needed to know what I was holding before I lifted it into the light. So for 2 more days I kept watching, and the house obliged me. Cora left papers on the kitchen counter one morning that she would not normally have left. I do not know if she was careless or if some sliver of her had grown lazy with confidence. I came in early before either of them was up, and I saw my own name printed in heavy black ink across the top page. My hand began to shake before my eyes had finished reading. Durable power of attorney, granting full financial authority to Cordelia A. Hartwell. I turned the page. Specimens of my signature in 3 different attempted versions, none of them mine. The loop of the E too tight, the slant wrong, the little flick I always put at the end of the T in Hartwell missing entirely. Someone had been practicing. I turned another page. A letter on the letterhead of a law firm in Lynchburg dated 2 months and 4 days after Thomas's funeral. Re-guardianship consultation in the matter of Eleanor M. Hartwell. Dear Mr. Hartwell, pursuant to our discussion, please find enclosed a preliminary outline of the procedural steps required to establish diminished capacity in an elderly relative and transfer financial control to a designated party. As discussed, the most efficient timeline involves. I did not finish the sentence. I heard a footfall in the upstairs hallway. I put the papers back exactly as I had found them. The corner of the top sheet lined up with the seam in the granite, and I was at the coffee pot with my back to the doorway when Cora came in. Morning, Mother. You're up early. Couldn't sleep, dear. Oh, well, I'll make us some eggs. She kissed the air beside my cheek. She smelled of expensive shampoo. I poured my coffee with a hand I had to hold very steady against the counter, and I smiled at her, and I thought, 2 months and 4 days. 2 months and 4 days after we buried him. You were already in a lawyer's office in Lynchburg. That was the day I stopped being afraid. Something else took its place. I do not have a clean word for it. Resolve, maybe. Or the cold, clean feeling of the inside of a church on a winter morning when nobody else has come in yet. I went back to the den. I sat on the edge of the daybed, and I took the blue card out from under the pillow, and I held it in the flat of my palm. "All right, Thomas," I said in a voice no louder than the moving of a curtain. "All right, love, show me." I did not know yet what the card opened. I did not know there was a man in a small bank on a corner in Mount Hollow who would stand up so fast his chair would scrape the floor. I did not know about the envelope in his safe with my name on the front in my husband's handwriting. I did not know about the trust or the $4 million or the file of photographs a private investigator had been quietly building since the autumn Thomas first walked out of the oncologist's office. I did not know any of that. I only knew that my husband, who had never lied to me in 46 years, had left me one last instruction, and I intended to follow it. The storm came in that evening off the ridge. You could hear it before you could see it, the long low pull of wind through the pines on the back lot. The first hard slaps of rain on the dining room window. Walter came home wet from the office. Cora poured him a glass of red wine, and she set a folder on the kitchen table with a casualness so studied it was almost beautiful to watch. "Mother, while we're all here, we've got some paperwork from the bank that needs a signature. Just routine. Make things easier going forward." She slid a pen across the granite. The pen was silver. The folder was open to a page already tabbed with a small yellow flag at the signature line. I looked at the folder. I looked at Walter, who was not looking at me. I looked at Cora, whose hand was resting on the back of the chair I was meant to sit in. Outside, the rain came down harder. I did not sit. No, dear. I don't believe I will. The kitchen went very still. The only sound was the rain and the small electric click of the ice maker in the freezer letting go of a fresh tray. Cora's smile did not move, but something behind it did. "I beg your pardon, Mother." I said no. "I'm not signing anything tonight." Walter looked up at last. His face had the careful blankness of a boy waiting to be told what to feel. "Mom, come on, it's just bank paperwork. Then it can wait until morning sun. And it can wait until I have had it read by a lawyer of my own choosing." The word lawyer changed the temperature of the room. Cora's hand left the back of the chair. Walter set his wineglass down very carefully on the counter, as though he was afraid it might break by itself. "Mother," Cora said, and her voice had gone smooth and slow, the way water goes smooth right before a fall. "I think you may be a little confused tonight. It's been a long week. Why don't you sit down? Why don't you sign this and let Walter and I worry about all the rest?" I did not sit. I put my hand into the pocket of my cardigan. My fingers closed around the blue card. "I'm not confused, Cordelia. I have not been confused. I was grieving. There is a difference. And I will not be doing any signing in this house. Not tonight. Not ever." The rain came down so hard against the window it sounded like a hand was throwing it. Walter spoke then. He spoke quietly, and he did not look at me when he said it. And I think that was the hardest part of the whole night, harder even than the rain. "Then I'm afraid you can't stay here, Mother. Not if you're going to be like this." I do not remember packing. I remember the small canvas suitcase on the daybed, and the framed photograph of Thomas in his Sunday shirt going in on top of my folded sweater, and the blue card going into the inside pocket of my coat with my house key from Beechwood Lane that I had never been able to bring myself to give up. I remember Cora standing in the hallway with her arms folded across her chest as I came past her. I remember Walter holding the front door open and not meeting my eyes. I remember the porch step and the rain hitting the brim of my hat, and the door closing behind me with the small polite click of a lock turning that has been waiting all night for the chance. I stood at the bottom of the front walk for I do not know how long. Long enough that the rain ran off my coat in a steady line and pooled in the toe of my shoe. The streetlights of that beige subdivision burned in long wet halos. Somewhere a dog began to bark and then thought better of it. I put my hand inside my coat and I closed my fingers around the blue card. "All right, Thomas," I said again to the rain and to the dark and to the man who had loved me for 46 years and who had known somehow that this night was coming. "All right, love. Take me where you meant for me to go." And then, very slowly, in shoes that were already ruined, I began to walk. The walk to the bus station took her almost 2 hours. She kept off the main road for the first stretch, partly because the rain was easier under the canopy of the side streets, and partly because she did not want to be seen by anyone who knew that subdivision. The suitcase wheel caught in the wet seams of every sidewalk, and after the third block, she stopped trying to roll it and lifted it instead, hugged against her hip, the way a woman carries a sleeping grandchild. Her cardigan had soaked through to her blouse, and the blouse had soaked through to her skin, and somewhere between the Methodist church and the all-night gas station, her hair came loose from its pins and fell heavy and dark down her back. She paid for the ticket in cash. The boy behind the glass did not look up. "One way to Mount Hollow, ma'am. Last bus tonight leaves in 21 minutes. She slid the bills under the slot, and her hand shook only a little. She counted that as a small mercy. The bus station waiting room smelled of vending machine coffee and old carpet. She sat under a fluorescent light that buzzed like a dying wasp and watched the rain run down the inside of the glass door. A man in a feed cap across the room was asleep with his mouth open. A young mother held a baby against her shoulder and patted it in a steady rhythm that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with not crying herself. Eleanor put her hand inside her coat. The blue card was warm from being held against her ribs. Beside it, the brass house key from Beechwood Lane bit cold into her thumb. She thought of Thomas as the bus pulled out, not as he had been at the end, thin and quiet in the bed by the window, but as he had been at 26, leaning against the side of his first work truck, in a white t-shirt with engine grease up to his elbows, grinning at her like the world had never produced a better joke than the fact that she had said yes. She closed her eyes against the dark window and held that picture of him the whole way through the gap. She must have slept because when she opened her eyes, the sky over the ridge had gone the color of cold steel, and the bus was easing down the long grade into Mount Hollow. The town came up to meet her the way a hymn comes up at the end of a long service, familiar in places she had forgotten she remembered. The feed store, the Methodist steeple, the little brick library with the dogwood out front, the Texaco that had been a Sinclair when she was a girl, with the same crooked sign for cold sandwiches in the window. She stepped off the bus at 6:14 in the morning. Her shoes squelched once on the curb. The driver looked at her, looked at the suitcase, opened his mouth, and then closed it again and pulled the door shut between them with a soft pneumatic sigh. She did not know where to go. It is a strange thing, friend, to stand in the middle of a town that was once yours and realize you no longer have a single key to a single door in it. The Hartwell house at the end of Beechwood Lane belonged to a young couple from Charlottesville now. The little parsonage where her parents had lived was a yarn shop. Even the cemetery gate where Thomas was buried beside his mother did not open until 8. So she walked to the only light she could see burning on Main Street. The window of Whitfield's bread and butter glowed gold against the wet brick. The hand-lettered sign hanging from the awning had not changed in 40 years. A loaf of bread, a pat of butter, and Hattie Mae Whitfield's name in a careful looping script. The smell came through the closed door before Eleanor's hand even touched it. Yeast and warm sugar and something deeper underneath the iron sweetness of cornmeal scalded with buttermilk. The bell over the door rang once. A small clear note. Hattie Mae was behind the counter with her sleeves shoved up over her elbows and flour to the wrists. She looked up. The smile that had been ready on her face for whoever the morning's first customer was going to be froze and then went somewhere else entirely. Lord have mercy. Ellie Hartwell. Eleanor opened her mouth and could not find a single word in it. Hattie came out from behind the counter without bothering to wipe her hands. She crossed the floor in 4 long strides and put both white-dusted arms around Eleanor's wet shoulders. And Eleanor felt the flower print itself onto the back of her coat in 2 perfect handprints. And she stood there in the doorway of a bakery on Main Street in Mount Hollow, Virginia. And finally, she let herself cry. Hattie did not ask anything. Hattie had been a coal miner's daughter and a widow at 32 and a Sunday school teacher for the better part of 50 years. And she knew the difference between a woman who needed answers and a woman who needed a chair. She walked Eleanor to a small painted table in the back corner, sat her down, put a folded dish towel under the suitcase, and went to fetch coffee. The cup she set in front of Eleanor was thick white china with a hairline crack running down the side. The coffee inside was the color of river silt and twice as strong. Beside the cup on a plain blue saucer, she set a single thick wedge of cornbread still warm. You drink that. You eat that. You don't say one word to me till you've done both. Eleanor obeyed. The cornbread was sweet at the edge and salt at the heart, the way Hattie had been baking it since 1968. And the first bite went down and the second bite went down. And somewhere around the third bite, something in Eleanor's chest that had been held very tight for a very long time loosened a single notch. Hattie sat across from her with her own cup and waited. They put me out, Eleanor said at last. Walter and his wife. Last night. In the rain. Hattie's mouth made one small flat line. She did not look surprised. That was the thing that struck Eleanor later, when she had time to think about it. Hattie Mae Whitfield, who had known her since the 2nd grade, did not look surprised. Honey, you eat your bread. There's a room upstairs over the kitchen that's yours for as long as you need it. We'll talk about the rest when the sun's higher. Eleanor wanted to argue. She was 68 years old, and she had never in her life accepted shelter from anyone she could not pay back by Friday. But the room behind her eyes was very small, and the kindness in front of her was very large, and so she nodded, just once, and finished her cornbread. The room above the bakery had a sloped ceiling and a single window that looked out at the back lot, where a pair of mockingbirds were arguing in a dogwood tree. The bed had a white chenille spread. There was a chair, a small dresser, and a hooked rug on the floor in a pattern of cabbage roses. It was the cleanest, plainest room she had ever stood in. She slept that day for 9 hours straight. When she woke, the light through the window was the soft amber of late afternoon, and Hattie had left a tray on the dresser, a sandwich, a slice of buttermilk pie, and a glass of milk. There was no note. There did not need to be one. She came down the back stairs at 5 o'clock. The bakery was closing up. Hattie was wiping the front counter with a damp rag, and without looking up, she said, Ellie, after I lock the door, there's something I need to give you. Your husband left it with me a long while back. Eleanor's hand went still on the banister. Thomas Hartwell. About 4 months before he passed on a Tuesday afternoon. He came in here on his own. Sat at that table you sat at this morning. Drank a cup of coffee with me and didn't say much the way Thomas didn't. And before he left, he handed me an envelope and he said, Hattie, if Ellie ever walks in here one day without any luggage to speak of you, give her this. And I said, Thomas Hartwell, you tell me right now what kind of trouble you think is coming for that woman. And he just smiled at me the way he did and he said, Hattie, I hope I'm wrong, but you give her that envelope. The bakery had gone very quiet around them. Outside on Main Street, a single car passed with its headlights already on. Hattie went into the small office behind the ovens and came out with a manila envelope that had been folded twice and unfolded again, the way an envelope gets when it has been carried in a coat pocket. Across the front in Thomas's handwriting, the slightly slanted block letters he had used to label every paint can and pipe fitting in his shop for 40 years was one word. Ellie. Eleanor took it with both hands, She did not open it then. She carried it back upstairs to the room above the kitchen and laid it on the chenille spread and sat beside it for a long time before she could bring herself to break the seal. Inside were three things: a folded sheet of yellow legal paper with an address written across the top. First Blue Ridge Savings and Trust, 218 Court Street, Mount Hollow. Ask for Ellis Crowder. He will know. A short note in Thomas's hand. Ellie, if you are reading this, then I was not wrong. I am sorry I could not be there to walk you in. Take the blue card. Take this letter. Ellis will do the rest. And remember what I told you, love. Trust the card, not people, not even kin. I love you in this world and the next. T. And taped to the inside of the envelope a small brass key she did not recognize. She read the note 4 times. By the 4th time, her hand was steady. By the 4th time, the woman who had stood in the rain on a porch step in Roanoke had begun somewhere down in her bones to become a different woman. She walked into First Blue Ridge Savings the next morning at 5 minutes after 9. The building was small, a single story of soft red brick with a black and gold sign and 2 pots of dying chrysanthemums by the front step. The lobby smelled of floor polish and old paper. There was one teller, a young woman with her hair in a French braid, and behind her, a glass-walled office where a man in his middle 50s was reading a stack of paper through a pair of half-glasses. Eleanor walked to the counter. She set the blue card on the marble. I'd like to speak with Ellis Crowder, please. My name is Eleanor Hartwell. The young woman looked at the card. Her face did not change. She picked it up and walked without hurrying to the office at the back. She knocked once on the glass and said something Eleanor could not hear. Ellis Crowder looked up from his papers. He looked at the young woman. He looked past her across the lobby at the small woman in the gray coat standing very straight at the counter. He set his half-glasses down on his desk so carefully, it was as though he had decided in that one motion that the rest of his morning was going to require both hands. He came out of the office himself. Mrs. Hartwell, Mr. Crowder, would you do me the kindness of stepping into my office, ma'am? He shut the door behind them. He did not sit at first. He stood with his hand resting on the back of his chair and looked at her the way a man looks at a letter he has been waiting 20 years to deliver and is now afraid he will not deliver well. Your husband, ma'am, Thomas. He came to see me 3 years ago last April. She nodded. She did not trust her voice. He set up a trust with this bank. He instructed us that the account was not to be discussed, referenced, or acknowledged in any communication with any person, related or otherwise, until such time as the holder of the blue card presented herself in person at this branch. Those were his exact words. The holder of the blue card. He had me write them down. Mr. Crowder sat down then. He folded his hands on the desk between them, and he turned his monitor a quarter turn so she could see it. The number on the screen had a 4 at the front and a great many digits after it. $4,216,000, ma'am, as of close of business yesterday. The principal came from the sale of the back 40 of the Hartwell family farm in 2021. Your husband sold the mineral and surface rights to Blue Ridge Solar. He put the entire proceeds in trust in your name, and he did not tell another living soul. Eleanor put her hand on the edge of the desk. She did not faint. She had not fainted in 68 years, and she was not going to start in front of Ellis Crowder. But the room narrowed for a moment around the edges the way it does when you stand up too fast from a long sit. He sold the back 40. Yes, ma'am. He told me that money went to pay the medical bills. Ellis Crowder did not answer. He did not have to. The two of them sat in the small office for a long minute, and outside the door the young woman in the French braid was humming under her breath. And Eleanor understood that her husband had spent the last 3 years of his life lying to her about exactly one thing, and that the lie had been a kind of love she had not even known he was capable of. She drove the trust card down deeper into her coat pocket as she walked back out into the sun. The pots of dying chrysanthemums by the front step looked suddenly like an extravagance she could replace. It was Hattie who brought her the man named Dalton. 2 evenings after the bank, Eleanor was sitting at the small painted table in the back of the bakery with a yellow legal pad and a cup of black coffee, trying to make a list and finding that her handwriting kept wandering off the line. Hattie came over and stood looking down at her for a moment and then said, "Ellie, there's a man over in Buchanan I want you to talk to. Used to be sheriff of this county before he retired. Name of Frank Dalton. Thomas knew him." Eleanor looked up. Knew him how, Hattie? Hattie sat down across from her. She wiped her hands on her apron. She took a long breath. "Honey, about a year and a half before Thomas went, he hired Frank to keep an eye on some things up in Roanoke. Frank doesn't talk about his clients, never has. But Thomas left word with me the same time he left the envelope that if you ever needed to find Frank, I was to tell you so. I think it's time, Ellie. I think it's time you knew what Thomas saw." The pencil in Eleanor's hand went very still. Saw sugar, yes. Frank Dalton drove up to the bakery the next afternoon in a clean black pickup with a Marine Corps decal on the back glass. He was a tall, weathered man of about 70, with white hair cut close and the kind of pale blue eyes that had seen a great many things and decided to keep most of them. He set a leather portfolio on the table between them, and he did not waste words. "Mrs. Hartwell, your husband hired me in the spring he was diagnosed. He asked me to watch your son and his wife. I did so for 18 months. I have continued to do so on my own time since his passing. I have prepared a file. It is not pleasant, but your husband paid me in advance to make sure it ended up in your hand if it ever needed to." He opened the portfolio. What was inside that portfolio is most of what part 2 of any story like this is built on, friend. I will not lay every page of it out for you here. But I will tell you what was on the top of the stack, because that is the page Eleanor was looking at when something inside her finally went hard and clean and quiet. It was a photograph. A small color photograph taken from across the street through what must have been a long lens, slightly grainy. Cordelia Hartwell, in a tailored cream coat Eleanor recognized, was sitting at an outdoor table at a coffee shop in downtown Lynchburg, leaning across a cappuccino toward a man in a charcoal suit. The man had a leather attorney's portfolio open in front of him. The date stamp in the lower corner of the photograph was 6 weeks after Thomas's diagnosis. 6 weeks. Eleanor put her finger on the date and held it there for a long moment. Underneath the photograph were emails, Cora's questions very precise to a firm called Hadley, Pruitt and Associates. How quickly can diminished capacity be established in the case of an elderly relative who has recently experienced a significant bereavement? What is the most efficient mechanism for transferring financial authority prior to the conclusion of a guardianship proceeding? Is it possible to begin the financial transfer process before the principal has been formally declared incompetent? Underneath the emails was a single-page transcript of a conversation Frank had recorded legally. He was careful to note on his own property, with his own device during a meeting, Cordelia had requested with him under the false pretense of investigating a fictitious break-in at the Roanoke house. He had let her talk. She had talked. She trusts him. That's the whole advantage. Once it's notarized, she won't even remember which papers she signed. Walter doesn't have the stomach for the legal end, but he'll do what I tell him. Eleanor read that line 3 times. The 3rd time she read it out loud. Her voice did not shake. He'll do what I tell him. Hattie, who had been standing at the counter pretending to wipe the same clean spot for the last 10 minutes, came over and set a small plate of cornbread on the table between them without a word. She put her hand on Eleanor's shoulder. The hand was warm and smelled faintly of yeast. Eleanor put her own hand on top of Hattie's and closed her eyes. She did not cry then. She had cried enough in the last week to last a person a year. What she felt instead was something cooler, more useful, more permanent. She felt the way she had felt the morning she had stood in front of a room full of 7-year-olds for the very first time in September of 1979, with 26 small faces looking up at her. And she had understood that whatever happened in that room for the next 9 months was hers to make or break. She felt, for the first time since Thomas had drawn his last breath fully in possession of her own life. She opened her eyes. Mr. Dalton, Sheriff, what do I do next? Frank Dalton allowed himself one very small, very tired smile. You go see a lawyer, ma'am. I have a name for you. Ruth Bennett over in Lexington. She specializes in this. Your husband already paid her a retainer. Of course he did. He did, ma'am. He surely did. The town began to know the way a small town knows everything by Sunday. No one said much. That was the way of Mount Hollow. Pastor Beauregard saw Eleanor coming out of the bakery on Friday afternoon and crossed the street in his shirt sleeves to take both her hands in his and say only Ellie. The organ bench is still yours, you understand, whenever you're ready. Edna at the Texaco refused to ring up a Coca-Cola for a tailored cream coat that walked into her store on Saturday morning, asking after a Mrs. Hartwell, and walked the woman in the coat to the door so politely that the woman did not understand for 2 full miles down the highway that she had been thrown out. A casserole appeared on Hattie's back step on Sunday evening with no note. Another the following Tuesday. A man Eleanor had not seen since the 80s stopped her on Court Street and pressed a folded $50 bill into her hand and said only, "For the lawyer, Mrs. Hartwell." Thomas built my mama's ramp in 1994 and never sent a bill and then walked on before she could refuse. She kept every $50 bill in a coffee can on the dresser in the room above the bakery. She did not need them. That was not the point. Ruth Bennett was a small, sharp woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain. She read Frank Dalton's file in her Lexington office without changing expression once. When she finished, she set the file down, took off her glasses, and looked at Eleanor across the desk. "Mrs. Hartwell, with your permission, I am going to file a formal demand for the cessation of all attempted financial proceedings against your person, a notice of contestation of the forged power of attorney, and a request for forensic handwriting analysis. I am also going to recommend that we wait for the moment before we file anything criminal, because I want them to make one more mistake. I want them to come at us in court first. Do you understand me, Mrs. Hartwell?" "Yes, Mrs. Bennett, I do." "Good, because they will." She was right. The call from Walter came on a Wednesday afternoon. Eleanor was upstairs in the room above the bakery, mending the cuff of the gray coat where the rain had pulled a seam, when her old flip phone began to buzz on the dresser. She had not turned the phone on for almost a week. She had only turned it on that morning to look up the number for the dentist. The screen said, "Walter Cell." She looked at it for a long count of 4. Then she opened it. "Mum." His voice was wrong. That was the first thing she registered. Not angry, not cold. Something underneath both of those. Something raw, something younger than 42. "Mum." "Listen. I need you to listen to me. I'm in the parking lot of the law office. I'm calling you from my truck. I'm not supposed to be calling you." "Walter." She filed it, Mom. Cora filed an emergency guardianship petition this morning in Potato County. She told me she was going in to talk to them about something else. She didn't tell me she was filing. I just saw the paperwork on her desk. "Mom, they're going to serve you. They're going to say you're not in your right mind. They're going to say I tried to help you and you ran off, and they're asking for emergency protective custody. They want a hearing in 4 days." Eleanor sat down very slowly on the edge of the chenille spread. Outside the window, the mockingbirds in the dogwood had gone silent. The afternoon light through the glass had the particular thin gold of a Virginia October about to turn into November. "Walter, Mom, I swear to God, I swear to you, on Dad. I did not know she was doing this. I knew the rest. I knew most of it. I'm not going to lie to you anymore. But this part, I did not know." There was a long silence on the line. She heard him breathing. She heard in the background the soft electronic ping of his truck door being open. "Mom, are you there?" She closed her eyes. She held the phone against her ear with one hand. With the other in her coat pocket, she closed her fingers around the worn edge of the blue card, the way a woman closes her hand around the only thing in a burning house worth saving. "I'm here, son. Mom. I'm so sorry." "I know you are Walter." "I know. We will talk about that another day. Right now, you tell me one thing. You tell me where she filed it, and you tell me the name of the judge." He told her. She wrote it on the back of an envelope with the pencil she had been using on her coat. Her handwriting did not wander off the line this time. "Walter, listen to me. You do not call this number again until I tell you to. You do not tell her you called me. You go home and you act exactly the way she expects you to act, and you wait. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Goodbye, son." She closed the phone. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long minute with the phone in her lap. Then she stood and put on the grey coat with the mended cuff and went down the back stairs to find Hattie. Night came down hard over Mount Hollow that evening. After supper, Eleanor walked out alone onto the small back porch behind the bakery and stood at the railing, the 4-day countdown already ticking somewhere underneath her ribs. The ridge cut a long black shape against a sky still bruised with the last of the sunset. A train sounded somewhere down in the valley, one long note, then another. She took the blue card out of her coat pocket and held it flat against her palm. In the porch light, it looked almost ordinary again. A small worn rectangle. A thing a stranger would not pick up off the sidewalk. She thought of Thomas at the kitchen table on Beechwood Lane on a summer evening. 40 years gone, drinking his black coffee, watching the light over the oak. She thought of him at 26 in a white t-shirt by his first work truck. She thought of him in the bed by the window, thin as a reed, whispering the only instruction he had ever needed to give her in 46 years of marriage. She lifted her face to the dark over the ridge. "All right, love. I see the storm now. I see it coming, and I'm not running this time." Behind her, the bakery's back door opened, and Hattie's voice came out quiet and sure. "Ellie, honey, come in out of the cold. Court's in 4 days. We've got work to do." Eleanor put the blue card back in her pocket. She turned her back on the dark ridge and went inside. 4 days is not a long time when you are 68 years old, and the woman across the county line has filed a petition to take your name from you. Eleanor learned that in the kitchen behind the bakery, at the small painted table that had become her office with Ruth Bennett's reading glasses glinting under the pendant lamp, and Frank Dalton's pale blue eyes steady across the rim of his coffee cup. Hattie kept the front of the shop running. The back belonged to the three of them, and to the file boxes that had begun to accumulate on the shelf where the flour used to be. Ruth worked the way a country doctor works in lambing season, without hurry, without breaks, and without ever once saying a word that was not necessary. She read every page of Frank's file twice. She had Eleanor sign a stack of affidavits and then go back and initial each page in the lower right corner. She sent 2 of her younger associates up to Lynchburg with subpoenas in unmarked envelopes. She arranged for a forensic document examiner from Richmond, a woman she trusted, to take the forged power of attorney apart letter by letter. "They will try to make this about you, Mrs. Hartwell, about your memory, about your judgment. We are going to make it about the paper. Paper does not forget. Paper does not get confused. Paper does not need a nap in the afternoon. Paper is what we are going to put in front of that judge." Eleanor nodded. She had not had a nap in the afternoon since 1973, but she did not argue the point. On the 3rd evening, she walked alone down Court Street to the little brick library. She did not have a reason. She told herself she did not have a reason. But her feet took her past the dogwood and up the granite steps, and the librarian, a woman she did not recognize, young, with kind eyes behind her glasses, looked up and said, "We close in 20 minutes, ma'am, but you take your time," in a voice that suggested she knew exactly who Eleanor was and was not going to mention it. Eleanor sat down in a wooden chair by the window with no book on her lap and watched the sun go down behind the courthouse across the square. The courthouse where in less than 48 hours She was going to stand up in front of a man in a black robe and ask permission to keep being herself. She put her hand inside her coat pocket. The blue card was there the way it had been there now for a great many days. She did not take it out. She just rested her thumb on the worn edge of it, and she felt very faintly as though Thomas had set his own thumb on the other side and pressed back. The morning of the hearing came in clear and cold. Hattie made her a breakfast she could not finish. She put on the grey coat with the mended cuff and a navy blue dress she had owned for 19 years, and a small string of pearls Thomas had given her on their 25th anniversary. She did not put on lipstick. She wanted the judge to see exactly the face he was being asked to set aside. Ruth Bennett met her on the courthouse steps. "Walk in beside me, ma'am. Do not look around for them. Do not look back. Eyes on the bench." The courtroom was smaller than she had expected. Wood paneling the color of strong tea. A ceiling fan turning slowly even though it was October. 12 rows of benches mostly empty. A bailiff with a kind face who nodded at her as she passed. She did not look around for them, but she heard from the bench behind the petitioner's table exactly one cough that she would have recognized in any courtroom in the world. Walter had come. What she did not hear was the high, careful click of heels that had been the soundtrack of 7 months in a beige subdivision in Roanoke. She did not turn her head. She sat down beside Ruth Bennett at the respondent's table, and she folded her hands in her lap, and she waited. The petitioner's attorney rose first. He was a young man with a good haircut and a suit that did not yet fit him the way his older partner's suits fit them. He cleared his throat twice before he began. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I have been informed by my client's husband, Mr. Walter Hartwell, who is present in the gallery today, that the petitioner, Mrs. Cordelia Hartwell, will not be appearing for these proceedings. She has been unreachable since yesterday evening. Mr. Hartwell is, as I understand it, prepared to address the court directly on the matter. Katie." A small ripple went through the room. The judge, a man in his early 60s with reading glasses on the end of his nose, and the slow, careful manner of someone who had heard a great many sad stories in this room, looked up over the top of the glasses. "Mr. Hartwell, are you represented by counsel this morning?" Walter stood up from the gallery. He had not shaved. His tie was crooked. "No, sir." "Your Honor, I am not. Are you prepared to speak on the record without counsel?" "Yes, sir, I am." That was the first twist of the morning, friend, and it was not a small one. Cordelia Hartwell had been seen at 4 in the afternoon the day before checking out of a hotel in Greensboro, North Carolina, with 2 suitcases and a withdrawal slip in her purse for the better part of $73,000 from a joint account that Walter, until he had walked into his own bank at 9 that morning, had not known was almost empty. She did not appear in the Potato County Circuit Court that day. She did not appear the day after. By the end of the month, she would be a matter for an entirely different sort of lawyer, in an entirely different sort of room. But that is a story for another night. The young attorney sat down. He was sweating at the temples. He had not been told about Greensboro. Walter walked to the front of the courtroom. His shoes made a soft sound on the wood floor that Eleanor would remember for the rest of her life. He stopped at the petitioner's table. He did not sit down at it. "Your Honor, my name is Walter Thomas Hartwell. I am 42 years old. I live at 414 Birchfield Court in Roanoke. The petitioner in this matter is my wife. The respondent in this matter is my mother." He paused. He looked for the first time that morning across the aisle. He looked at Eleanor. He did not look long, but he did not look away first either. "Your Honor, I am here to withdraw this petition in its entirety, with prejudice. I want the record to show that my mother, Eleanor Margaret Hartwell, is of entirely sound mind. She has been of sound mind every single day of the last year. She was of sound mind on the night I asked her to leave my home, and she was of sound mind when she refused to sign papers that I knew, when I said them in front of her, were not honest. I knew. I want the record to show that too. I knew, and I let it happen anyway. I told myself a great many things. I told myself I was protecting her. I told myself I was protecting our family. I was protecting nothing. Your Honor, I was protecting a debt on a piece of land in Bedford County that I had no business taking out in the first place, and I let a woman I should have stood up to convince me that my own mother was the way out of it. His voice did not break. He was holding it the way a man holds a heavy bucket of water. Across a long yard, both hands slow, careful, do not spill. My father, Thomas Hartwell, tried to warn me. He tried to warn me in the last weeks of his life. I would not hear him. He could not say it plain because that was not his way, and I would not learn to listen for what he could not say. I want that on the record also. I want the record to show that my father saw what was coming and tried to put his hand between it and my mother. And the only thing that finally got through to me was my mother standing up by herself in this room today. The judge let him finish. He let the silence after the last word settle the way silence settles in a country church after the last hymn. Then he took off his reading glasses, set them on the bench, and said only, "Petition dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Hartwell, you will please be seated, Miss Bennet. The court would like to hear briefly from your client." Ruth turned and looked at her. Eleanor stood up. She had not prepared remarks. She had not thought until that moment that she would need to speak. She walked to the front of the courtroom, and she stood where Walter had stood, and she looked up at the judge, and she discovered that her hands were not shaking. "Your Honor, my name is Eleanor Hartwell. I taught the second grade at Mount Hollow Elementary for 31 years. I was married to Thomas Hartwell for 46. I raised the man you have just heard from. I'm not angry at him this morning. I'm not anything at him this morning. I am only tired. I would like to be allowed to go home now, Your Honor, and pick out what kind of life I have left in front of me. That is all I came here to ask." The judge looked at her over the top of his reading glasses for a long moment. "Mrs. Hartwell, you may go home." She went out of that courtroom on Ruth Bennet's arm. She did not look at Walter as she passed him. But as she reached the aisle, she felt his hand brush very lightly the sleeve of her grey coat, not to stop her, not to ask anything of her, only the way a child touches a banister to know it is still there. She did not pull her arm away. On the courthouse steps, she stopped and let the October sun come down on her face for the first time in what felt like a year. Frank Dalton was waiting at the bottom of the steps with the door of his pickup open. Ruth was already on her phone. Hattie had stayed back at the bakery because Hattie had said that morning over breakfast, "Ellie, when you walk back through that front door, I want there to be cornbread waiting and not me clucking on a porch step." And she was a woman of her word. Walter came down the steps a moment later. He stopped 3 steps above her. He did not come closer. "Mom." She turned and looked up at him. Her son, her only son, 42 years old, in a tie that was still crooked with the lines around his eyes that had not been there a year ago. "Walter, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I want you to know that. I'm not standing here for that. I know, son. I just wanted you to see me say it, out loud where it counted. I saw you, Walter." She reached up. She put her hand against the side of his face, the way she had put her hand against the side of his face when he was 7 years old and feverish in the back room on Beechwood Lane. He closed his eyes for the briefest second. He did not lean into it. He did not pull away. It was not forgiveness. It was a door neither shut nor opened, with the latch lifted from the inside. That was enough, friend. For that morning, that was enough. She bought the house on Beechwood Lane back in the 3rd week of November. The young couple from Charlottesville had found out that autumn that they were expecting twins, and the long drive to the city had become a problem. Ellis Crowder handled the paperwork in a single afternoon, sitting at his desk with the same patient half-glasses on the end of his nose. The closing was so quiet, she half expected the building to creak with the relief of it. The first thing she did, the first afternoon she had the keys in her hand again, was walk around to the back fence and put both palms flat against the trunk of the great oak. The bark was cold. The tree did not know her. The tree did not need to know her. The tree had stood there the whole time she had been gone. She stood with her forehead against the bark for a long minute. Then she went inside. She brought very little with her. The 2 boxes from the beige subdivision, the small canvas suitcase from the rain, a hooked rug Hattie pressed on her Ellie. I have 3 of them. Do not argue with me in a pattern of cabbage roses. A coffee can full of folded $50 bills from a town that had decided without ever holding a single meeting about it to look after her. The blue card she set on the kitchen windowsill, leaning against the glass where the morning light over the oak would find it every day just after Easter, and again every September, and again every October, the way it had found the same patch of linoleum for 46 years before. She started the Blue Card Initiative on a Tuesday in January at the small painted table in the back of the bakery. Hattie was the co-founder. Ruth Bennett did the incorporation papers in exchange for a standing weekly loaf of sourdough. The first client was a 73-year-old widow over in Craig County, whose nephew had emptied her checking account 3 weeks before Christmas. By the end of the first year, there were 11 clients. By the end of the second year, there were 46. Eleanor did not run it the way a woman of means runs a charity. She ran it the way a second-grade teacher runs a classroom, by sitting down across from each woman who walked in and pouring her a cup of coffee and saying, "Honey, tell me from the beginning. We've got time." Walter wrote the first letter in March. It came in a plain white envelope with a Roanoke postmark. She read it on the porch swing slowly twice. He did not ask for anything. He did not explain anything. He told her about a small carpentry business he had started working out of a rented garage, taking the jobs no one else wanted. Porch repairs, ramps for people coming home from the hospital, a wheelchair lift for a man in Salem whose wife had multiple sclerosis. He did not mention his father. He did not need to. The handwriting on the envelope was Thomas's handwriting, only a generation softer. She did not write back that month, or the next. In June on the morning, her flip phone rang from a number she did not recognize, and a young woman's voice said, "Mrs. Hartwell, this is St. Mary's Hospital in Roanoke. Your son is in our emergency room. He is going to be all right, but he has asked us to call you." She got in Hattie's old Buick, and she drove the Gap Road in 52 minutes flat. She sat beside Walter's bed in a paper chair for 3 hours, while a kidney stone the size of a pea worked its slow way out of him. She did not say much. He did not say much. When the nurse came in to discharge him, she said, "Mama, you don't have to wait," and Eleanor said, "Walter Thomas Hartwell, I am driving you home," and that was the end of that conversation. She wrote back to the second letter in October with a single sheet of stationery and 7 sentences on it. "I hear you. I see the work you are doing. I am not opening every door at once. I'm opening the screen door. The heavy door behind it is going to take time. Take care of yourself, son. That is where this begins. Mama." She sealed the envelope on the kitchen table. She slid it across the counter into her purse. As she did, the morning light over the oak came in through the window and slid across the kitchen and laid itself flat against the blue card on the windowsill. The way light had laid itself across a younger Thomas's coffee cup 46 Octobers before the way it lays itself now across the keys of the small piano in the church, where she still plays for the Sunday service, the way it will lay itself, in time across whatever room she is sitting in on whatever last morning she's given. The package from Ellis Crowder came in November. He had found it in the trust safe deposit drawer in a wooden box she did not recognize, and he had not opened it. Inside the box, wrapped in a clean handkerchief, was a small leather-bound journal in Thomas's handwriting. It was dated. The first entry was the day after his diagnosis. The last was 4 days before he died. There were 178 entries, one for every day, and each one began with the same 3 words. Today I love Ellie, because some of the entries were a paragraph long. Some were a single line. Today I love Ellie because she still hums when she's stirring the gravy. Today I love Ellie because she let me sleep an extra hour. Today I love Ellie because she did not pretend I was going to get better just to make me feel easier. Today I love Ellie because she has not once in 46 years made me feel small for being afraid. The last entry in handwriting that had grown thin as river ice read, "Today I love Ellie because she is going to be all right." I do not know how I know this. I know it the way I know the light comes in over the oak in the morning. She's going to be all right. Live wide, Ellie. Do not shrink to fit anyone's idea of who you should be without me, not even mine. T. She read it on the porch swing under the oak on a clear, cold November afternoon, with the blue card pressed flat between her palm and the cover of the journal. The light was the long, low gold of a Blue Ridge afternoon, just turning toward evening. The mockingbirds were quiet. Somewhere down the lane, Hattie's old Buick was coming slow with a covered dish on the passenger seat. Eleanor did not cry. The crying was done. She closed the journal. She set it on the small table beside the swing. She set the blue card on top of it. She lifted her face to the light coming in over the oak, and she closed her eyes, and she rocked the swing once with the toe of her shoe the way Thomas used to rock it on Sunday evenings 46 summers gone. She said very quietly to no one and to him, "I am all right, love. I am all right." The light moved on across the porch boards. The oak stood. The blue card on the journal caught one last slant of gold and held it the way a small thing planted in silence holds the patience of the gardener, who planted it until the season turns, and the gardener is gone, and the thing planted finally in its own time opens. Some seeds are sown in silence, friend. They take their times. They wait for the one who can be trusted to hold the light. If this story sat with you tonight, I would love to hear from you. Have you ever been given something quiet by someone you loved? A letter, a kindness, a small instruction you did not understand until years later, that turned out to be exactly what carried you through. Tell me about it in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. And rest easy tonight. There are more stories like Eleanor's, and I will be here to tell them. Sleep well, friend. The light comes back over the oak in the morning.